To lead us in this next very important session is Jeff Boise. He is the chairman and CEO of Roundtable Investment Partners, and my personal hero because he is the founder of the Leadership Roundtable. Jeff.
Thanks. Thanks very much, Carrie. And I just want to thank you all for being here, and I particularly want to thank Jim Dubik for his leadership and succeeding me as chairman. He's just done a fabulous job, and you can tell from not only the insight, but the commanding presence and the way that he has energized and taken this organization to the next level. I think the Catholic Church in the United States and around the world is going to be benefiting from this for many years. So, Jim, thank you so much. You know, we are really blessed and privileged to have today, in my opinion, two of the most influential lay Catholics in the world today, particularly as it impacts the temporal affairs of the Church around the world. You're going to hear for the next hour or so. We're going to engage in a conversation with the two of them, based on the experiences that they've had over the last several years. First, we're going to hear from Danny Casey, who's in Rome today. Danny, for those of you who are Game of Thrones people, he is the right hand of Cardinal Pell. And so a lot of you haven't seen Game of Thrones, obviously, or won't admit it, exactly. But Danny is someone that I've gotten to know over the last several years and have tremendous regard for him. He's had a lot of experience in the business world in terms of not only in the energy business, the accounting world, the insurance world, and the legal world. And for the last 13 years, he has served the Church in a number of critically important ways, working with Cardinal Pell when Cardinal Pell was the Archbishop in Australia, and then for the last several years in the Vatican in terms of really executing on the transformation of the temporal affairs of the Church at the Vatican, and as we'll hear, how it hopefully will impact the rest of us around the world. And so he is a tremendous talent and a great human being, and someone I'm sure we're all going to enjoy hearing. The other person is Elizabeth McCall. Elizabeth is somebody that I've known for probably 20 years now, and she not only worked at Goldman Sachs, where I worked for a number of years, but she was a superintendent of banks for New York, and in that responsibility oversaw literally trillions and trillions of dollars of capital of some of the major institutions of the world, and in particularly after 9/11 was instrumental in getting the financial system back up working from a supervisory standpoint. And from that, as Americans, we should be really thankful to the work that she and her colleagues. She's currently the partner in charge of the New York office of Promontory Capital, and Promontory was engaged by the Vatican in the early stages and up until really recently in terms of the transformation of the compliance side and helping give advice on how to structure many aspects of the transformation that Danny and she will talk about. And so she's a great friend, she's a great Christian, and is a fellow parishioner, so I've known her for a long period of time. So with that, Danny, perhaps you could kick us off and educate us as to what's been going on in the Vatican.
Thank you, Jeff, and thank you everybody for having me here today. I must say, just been a little bit distracted the last minute or two. That warm introduction had me wondering. I couldn't hardly wait to see what I'm going to say. So I'm sort of thinking, I hope I live up to that wonderful introduction. So thank you for that. People have often said to me, how did you get to do what you do? How did you end up here doing this? And I have to say, there's on many, many occasions in recent times, I've found myself dark nights asking exactly the same question. What I thought I'd do today is paint a little bit of a picture of the journey from Sydney, how it relates to the journey here in Rome. And in the middle piece, I think Elizabeth's going to cover very much and very well the sort of mechanics and details about what had been done in the wonderful work that her and her colleagues did in 2013 and 14 and a little bit beyond. So I thought I might just start with that. But one of the first things I want to reflect on is an interesting article that the Cardinal and I have widely quoted around here in the Vatican. And it was an article that appeared, that was certainly drawn to my attention in one of my professional journals. And it was written by Jacob Soll, who's the author of a book called The Reckoning, Financial Accountability and the Rise and Fall of Nations. And as an accountant, which is where I was originally trained and probably still am, this is not some plea for relevance about how important our profession is. It's actually a pretty interesting analysis of just how important financial accounting and management reporting is. And there are a number of points made in this article, and one was that good accounting builds stronger societies and poor accounting actually leads nations away. Greece was actually seen for the first few years of its membership of the EU as the star bullet performer, outperforming everybody else in the EU, until more accurate financial reports started to emerge in 2009 and people started to see more of the reality. Louis XIV refused to replace his top accountant, and by the time of his passing, France was broke. And Soll argues that may well have been one of the causes behind the French Revolution. But some other messages to draw this together is that poor measurement and inadequate accounting have contributed very much to some of the current challenges that we face here in the EU, disguising debts and deficits and governments indeed all round. I suppose one of the key conclusions that is also emphasised is that what is not measured is not managed. And so as that sort of as a bit of an introduction, if there was one point that sort of comes through in our discussion today, and that is that the church has got no excuse for not being precise about its measurement. The church has absolutely got no excuse for not knowing where it is. And what I'll paint with you is a bit of a picture of the journey in a couple of places where I think we've made an interesting contribution to helping that happen. It was around 14 years ago that I was first asked by a headhunter to consider putting my name forward to work with Cardinal Pell in the Archdiocese of Sydney. I'd worked with many organisations. The church just wasn't on my list. And I said to the headhunter, look, I'm not really that interested. He said, the job's made for you. You'll love it. You'll stay there for many, many years. I said, every time you've approached me over the last 10 or 15 years, you've told me the same thing. He said, but this time I mean it, he said. This time I'm telling you the truth. He persisted, and I decided to throw my hat in the ring. And after my 8th or 9th meeting, I was having a one-on-one for an hour with Cardinal Pell. And the Cardinal said to me that he wanted to create this role as a business manager, the first lay person to hold the role in Sydney as a business manager and the canonical financial administrator. He wanted me to, he said what he wanted us to be was, we're not a business, but he wanted to be business-like in the way we administer our affairs. He said, I think that we need to be striving for far better business administration, business performance. And I said, well, what's your benchmarks? What sort of standards do you aspire to? Because I had images of the church and church fates and, the Leaning Tower of Pisa as a classic example of where things can go wrong. And Cardinal Pell said, my benchmark is at least as good as the very best. Now, I was stunned with at least as good as the very best as a benchmark. And he said, well, I want my business manager to be able to deliver that for the church. I said, that's one hell of a high standard to set. And he came straight back with, well, think of who we are, think of who we're working for. What gives us the right to leave money on the table? What gives us the right to be sloppy in our administration? Why shouldn't we negotiate well and hard like everybody else does in business? We're entrusted with patrimony that's not our own. We then went on and chatted about a number of things, and some of this conversation many years ago had an enormous impact on me. The obligations we have in the church administration are extreme. We don't just have obligations to people we serve today. The church is eternal. We actually have inherited much from the people who came before us, and they're watching from the church eternal as to how well we, the stewards of today, are administering ourselves. But we go on. If we don't do a good job today, we compromise and make life more difficult for the people that follow us. So we actually have stakeholder management through time, which is something that I'd never had and encountered in my corporate life. I tried to look after the shareholders of the day. I tried to make our companies attractive so that people would pay more to be a part of it tomorrow. But I never worried too much about those who sold out yesterday. They were off my radar at that point in time, but not so in the church. So when I started in the Archdiocese, we both had some considerable work to do. We had around 600,000 Catholics, 135 parishes, 10,000 staff, and 1 in 5 children in Sydney went to one of our schools. 1 in 10 people were in one of our hospitals. We had 2,500 people working every week as catechists teaching the faith in government schools. A range of other support and welfare programs that we had in place. We had a central treasury with hundreds of millions of dollars invested of agencies' funds, and we used to put that out on the market and manage liquidity through the whole Archdiocese. And while there was nothing particularly improper about the way it was administered, it was sloppy. It could have been done better. We didn't have the skills and experience that we need. The whole markets had moved and demanded greater skills than what we'd had before, than what we'd previously had before. So it became very clear to me as to why the Cardinal had felt that he wanted to find a senior layperson to sit as one of his advisors as the canonical financial administrator. Now, as we went on over the journey, we started to concentrate on a number of different areas. We started to look at procurement practices. We developed standards for how we would contract with suppliers of goods and services. We included the introduction of Catholicity clauses in many of the contracts that we put out, which actually opened up a dialogue about why the church believes what it believes. We took the view, as we must, that we're actually Catholic 24/7. We don't actually set it aside when we're trying to do a business negotiation. We have an obligation to explore the teachings of the church, and we've got no obligation to be conducting our administration in a manner that's contrary to church teaching. We developed, part of that dialogue about the Catholicity clauses, I think, led to enormous discussions we had around why the church believes what it believes, and wonderful moments of evangelisation and catechesis emerged from those business meetings, from those discussions. I think the other thing we made an emphasis is there's nothing inconsistent with church teaching and good business. And I think one of the things we did was we established a business network to improve the quality of dialogue with government and business leaders, because we actually feel we have a right to a seat at the table, and we also feel that we have an obligation to reach out to leaders who may not have had the formation, who may not have had the connection, and to discuss these sort of issues with them in the way we conduct business, to look at policy issues, to look at issues of social concern. And what you start to unlock there is a whole lot of business leaders and government leaders who are worried about next generations, who are worried about where things are, and who weren't aware of the voice of the church in these particular areas. We particularly focused on lazy assets. We sent them on a boot camp. So we brought over the balance sheet to look at areas where we felt we weren't getting a return. We had a binary approach to assets. They were either involved in the mission or they were involved in generating a commercial return for the mission. There was no hybrid position. It was one or the other. Now, what we had, if there was a decision to use some of the commercial returns to support a pastoral activity, that's a separate decision to what happens to the return on an asset. If you start to blur things and allow for a lack of precision, we found, then all of a sudden you can't measure performance as accurately as you might need to. So we unlocked income streams, and the whole plan was to try and build up effectively a sovereign wealth fund that would generate regular income, that would underwrite programs. At the end of our 10 or 11 years together in the Archdiocese, we had more than doubled the value of our net assets, not by taking over aggressively other dioceses, but in fact by working the asset base harder. But more importantly than that, we had increased annual expenditure on good works by 250% per annum. So a substantial lift over the time, and leaving behind a diocese that was much stronger, had much more capacity to do good than perhaps the one we inherited. We also hosted the Holy Father with World Youth Day. We built a retreat centre. We built a centre for pilgrims here in Rome. So a range of different new initiatives that would not have been possible if we hadn't have taken control of the business administration. So their money may be a tainted thing, but the Church does need it to do its good works. And those of us who are entrusted with administration of that have a very special and heavy obligation. Now, in 2014, the Holy Father announced certain reforms and called Cardinal Pell to Rome. I think Elizabeth will outline a bit more about Casea and the work that was done and the reasons behind it. So I won't go into that too much, but I will just pick up a few points and now talk to you a little bit about the work we've been doing in the last few years here, which is built upon the wonderful, groundbreaking work undertaken by Elizabeth and a number of other extraordinarily dedicated people in 2013 and 14 in particular. But some of the key findings and the key attempts there was to establish the 4 Eyes principles in the way in which we work here in Rome, to separate the concentration of power that had emerged in the Vatican over a number of years, and to devolve authority to local levels with appropriate accountability, to adopt international standards in the way we conduct ourselves and our reporting. And I was giving a paper a few weeks back and someone said, why doesn't the Vatican have its own standards? And why are we prepared to constrain ourselves to international standards? And I paused and said, look, I think the Vatican has been operating to its own standards, and that's why we're aspiring to international standards. So, but importantly, in what has been a very loose franchise, we're going to apply these standards to all institutions. So if you're part of the firm, you're part of you're subject to the standards. And while any of this may appear completely non-controversial, it is extraordinarily groundbreaking for the world here inside the walls. The Holy Father did establish new areas of control, new bodies of control and vigilance, the Council and the Secretariat for the Economy, and Cardinal Pell leads the Secretariat. I suppose the main objectives that were followed with the reforms were to provide a consistent set of financial management policies and practices across all entities, because it was not consistent in the past. Very difficult to know where we are. It was to facilitate decision-making at a local level. How can we hold people accountable? How can we actually ask people to develop plans when we've got no way of measuring progress towards those plans or the resources they have? Strengthening the planning process was an important aspect of the beginnings of our work, which we put in 2014. And why are we doing all this? Not just for the wonderful nature of sound professional standards, good and all meritorious as that may be, but because we want to make more resources available for the good works of the Church, but especially for the poor. You know, if we leave money on the table in a negotiation because we haven't got the courage to argue for it, or if we cut corners in the way in which we tender, or if we don't demand performance on the way in which assets are used, then someone is missing out. Someone is not, as Cardinal Pell said, what our philosophy is, we maintain the asset base in real terms and we spend every other dollar or euro here that we make doing good work. We've got no right to steal from the future, but by the same token, we've got no right to leave money idle when it should be working to do good. So the principles that there apply to all entities. They are consistent with the relevant international accounting standards. They will be. The Secretariat has a big role in change management and supporting entities. But some of what what did some of this mean when we first did the training programs here in late 2014? We actually pointed out, well, what does this mean to an administration person or an accounting officer in one of our dicasteries? We said, well, it means all assets and liabilities have to be on the books. Now that drew an interesting reaction. Does that mean everything? You know, does that mean that the funds I've got in the bank accounts in Italy? Does that mean the funds we've got overseas for the poor? And we said, well, yes, it does. Someone then asked me, and I wasn't sure. I have to say, I really wasn't sure whether this was an opportunity to ridicule what we were doing. But someone did put their hand up and said, can I ask a question? So you can ask whatever you like. We're here to discuss. When you say everything on the books, does that mean the things we do in cash? Now, after just pondering that for half a second, certo, yes, see, absolutely, certainly, yes. And then the reaction was extraordinary. It was as if everyone in the room held their breath at the one moment. I said, did you really say yes, everything in cash? And someone immediately jumped up and said, what about the people we pay in cash? Surely not those. I said, well, actually, yes, we do. We will. And then it was someone else then said, well, 90% of what I do is in cash. Now, at that point, I thought I was dealing with a manager from a very small dicastery. I hadn't realised he was 10 times the size and complexity of that was the only visibility I had was 10% of his activity. And when you think, what does that mean in terms of risk, in terms of governance, in terms of transparency, when I'm only accessing 10% of what is actually happening in that particular area? Well, and it was been well publicised that 1.4 billion of assets was uncovered in this process. Now, people knew that existed, and none of us has ever suggested that it necessarily meant that it was skullduggery behind the scenes. But what it certainly was a lack of visibility about the way things are being managed, and perhaps a lack of opportunity to leverage scale in the way certain investments were being made and transactions are being incurred. They're now on the books. But on top of that, we also have a much more complete list of entities here. Because not only did we have assets off the books, we had entities that weren't existed that weren't registered and included in the consolidated financial statements. So two elements of a lack of visibility have now been corrected. And if there's probably one thing that we're much more confident about, we've got a much better handle now on where we are than has ever been the case in the past. And why not? When you think we've got a much more complete list of entities and we've got actually a much greater visibility, in fact, almost complete visibility we anticipate on the assets and investments and liabilities that entities have. So we introduced the custom of signing the declarations of each of the financial returns. And while some people managed to forget to sign once and even twice, and in one case 3 times, we kept sending things back because we wanted a declaration of completeness, again, as part of the whole question of governance and accountability and that people have as stewards of church resources. To do all this, clearly, it required a massive effort in change management, communication and training, and it is a long, long journey. And this is a big part of what the Secretariat is putting in place. We are building frontline level 1 controls and procedures in high-risk areas, ensuring segregation of duties, ensuring consistency of practice from one dicastery to another. We're also then using the whole control and vigilance structures to help engage with people about budgeting and planning. We introduced a new budget process that was actually started with a dialogue about what you do and what you hope to do. Before we get into any numbers, let's talk about plans. Let's talk about achievements. Let's talk about how we manage success. How else do you ration finite resources if you're not certain of the merits or how they're proposed to be spent? And if someone wins a bid for resources, then they've won it at the expense of someone else. So they have an enormous responsibility to deliver what they have promised. So the notion of a budget not being an accounting exercise, but being a management plan or promise to the Holy Father has been introduced as the basis of our budgeting process. We've adopted IPSAS as the international standards, and we will transition to that over several years. Now, recognising we're a sovereign and not a corporation, we've used IPSAS, the public sector accounting standards, which are uniquely shaped around the special needs and accountability framework associated with public entities. We develop financial management policies to underpin our work and to guide the entities. So we summarised IPSAS down into a more smaller set of financial management policies, the first set of policies ever developed. And together with that and the complete list of entities, we deployed a new budgeting process to get a much more precise estimate of existing activities and where things are. Apart from accounting and budgeting, we've started to look at policies in other areas. In particular, two things of great interest are ethical investing and slavery proofing or forced labour in our supply lines. I mean, two particular areas where we think, the Church and the Holy See in particular needs to take a leadership position. Now, many church entities and others have done wonderful work in this field, and we're engaging with people about this so that we can look towards reshaping our practices in this area, and then perhaps providing, through some moral authority, some leadership on how these issues might be dealt with. And perhaps finally, one of the other initiatives is something that Cardinal has always felt strongly about, is developing the talent base here in the Holy See. Now, clearly, as you transition from one model to another, there's going to need to be a significant injection of external talent to help facilitate the change process. But our hope and ambition is that we can also develop the skills internally through that process. And we've recently started, with the support of Georgetown University, a leadership development program for middle managers to start to unlock potential and to start help develop critical thinking and other aspects that they haven't been given before. These things have not been put in place here in the past, and the Cardinal's very committed to making certain that we do all we can to grow the skill base. So we're working on that. The key conclusions, I'm nearly done. The task we're doing is not optional. And the task you're doing as church administrators is not optional either. We owe it to all we serve to implement best practices in administration. It doesn't mean we're a business, but there's no excuse for not being businesslike. And once you start on a journey, there's no turning back. The hardest thing about learning the rules of a new game is forgetting the rules of the old game, especially when you're under load. And so we need to constantly reinforce the learnings of the new game, and this is a long-term project we're engaged in here in the Holy See. But a small improvement in efficiency or investment practice can make an enormous difference. So many more people can be helped, and say, for instance, are being helped in Sydney as a result of the work we did from some of the negotiations that we had when we unlocked potential and value that was latent in the balance sheet. Now, I don't know how many more people will be reached. I don't know how many more poor will be reached. I don't know how many more souls will be saved because of that work. But what I do know is the Archdiocese has got much more capacity to underwrite more robust and extended time programs over an extended period of time than it had at the time that Cardinal Pell and I joined. I think the other thing is transparency and international standards are a very good benchmark, and transparency is coming. Whether we like it or not, it is the way of the future, and it needs to be. What may have happened in the dark will be seen in the light, and so we need to be ready, and we need to be clear, and we need to ask questions. If we're ashamed of conduct, then we better be asking our questions about why we've allowed that conduct to occur. As I said, the church is not a business, but it needs to be business-like. So the starting point of our journey was about drafting principles based upon the wonderful work that had been done by CASEA and their advisors. Armed with those principles, we developed policies and plans and set priorities to implement change and to take people with us. It's early days, but I think by any measure we think we've made a good start. Cardinal Pell says that the ambition we have is your target here is to make us boringly successful, to take us out of the media. And we're certainly doing our best to reach that goal. And I hope I wasn't too boring today, so it's just been a delight to share it with you, and thank you so much for having me here today.
Danny, thank you so much. What we're going to do now is have Elizabeth come up and say a few words, and then if you wouldn't mind, we're going to have questions from the audience for both of you.
Very happy. Thank you.
Thank you. Danny, you are a brave, brave man. I know very well how hard your job is, and thanks for telling all of us today about some of the specifics of what you've been able to do. And His Eminence would not be able to proceed without you on his right hand, I'm 100% sure. So thank you. I'm going to talk a little bit today just about let's say, what happened in the weeds a bit. And I'm going to take you through just a little background on some of the history and explain in a bit more detail what some of the reforms are. My role was really as a servant in church language, to be an advisor and to use my skills as a layperson to assist the incredible efforts that really are undertaken by the Holy Father, His Eminence, and Danny Casey. And recognizing that whatever each of us can contribute, we're supposed to do that in our time. And this moment was something that I was certainly trained for and had a chance to do. I will just take you back to those dark days before the light of 2013 and really remind all of us that when the papal conclave met in 2013, there was a crisis of confidence in the church. And this was born of the real lack of transparency, the continuing very negative news that Danny's referencing, that were, the stuff of the front page news journals around the world, and a continual drumbeat of problems that were occurring that were emanating from a lack of controls, lack of transparency, lack of adherence to international regulatory practices, lack of observance to standard financial practices that are there to create confidence. And these are just some of the headlines. 3 arrested in Vatican Bank scandal, Vatican Bank director, deputy resign amid scandal, Vatican Bank faces fresh money laundering scandal, JP Morgan closes their accounts. This is what was happening to the sovereign entity of the Holy See, was a closing of the world's doors from a financial point of view. And that meant that the trust was not there in terms of their ability to control the access to the use of the financial system, such that it wasn't being used for nefarious purposes, terrorism financing wasn't going through the accounts, money laundering wasn't going through the accounts, and frankly, the message that was there was exactly the opposite. So almost immediately after the Holy Father was elected as Pope, he identified financial reform as one of his top priorities, and it's no accident. The reason to address that as a top priority was to really get underneath and into the weeds and fix and make transparent the issues that were occurring in the Vatican, so that confidence in the church and the very important work of the church to serve the poor, to spread the good word, would be allowed to continue. Danny said it very well, that this is about doing your job well now so that in the future the good works of the church can continue around the world. And we were really at an inflection point at that moment. So the Holy Father immediately established a pontifical commission to harmonize the mission of the EOR, and that is the quote-unquote Vatican Bank with the Holy See. He set up 5 members of this organization called CREOR to study what it was doing and to really set it on a much more positive course. The idea of this CREOR was to collect documents and information, get management to cooperate so that they could get underneath what was actually happening inside the EOR, and then present the Holy Father with a plan that would ensure that the Vatican's financials going through this part of its structure would be pristine, and that doors to internationally active financial services institutions around the world would not be closing. Because if those doors shut, if they were completely closed, the funding activities and the serving the poor could not continue. The Holy Father also enlisted another commission and set forth COSEA, and Danny referenced this as well. And the COSEA was put in place to look at the entire organizational structure and economic structure of the Holy See, and to make sure that the government itself was set up so that it had the appropriate administration and checks and balances and governance and accounting. And ultimately, what happened with that COSEA was a report setting forth the Minister of Economic Affairs, and this is, of course, Cardinal Pell's role, which was not in existence at all inside of the Holy See. There was not a separate economic framework for the Holy See that was in place at all. He set forth through the work of COSEA to strengthen the legal and the institutional frameworks, and the real role, and Danny said this as well, aspiring to move toward internationally accepted practices. And that seems like a low bar, but the bottom line is there was no framework in place to coordinate with the regulatory structures. And in fact, we had government agencies from outside of the Holy See bringing into question the finances of the Vatican and putting forward reports that ultimately led to the closure of accounts in Italian banks and the access for European banks being closed, so that they ultimately found in the beginning that the Vatican was not compliant with standard regulations aimed at preventing money laundering or standard processes for ensuring that the people running those things had appropriate skills, appropriate authorities, or even that there was a regulatory framework in place to govern that overall process. So the IFE was created. The IFE is a regulatory agency just like the Federal Reserve, for example, where it has oversight over the bank and the financial institutions inside of the Vatican. And it has set forth under the leadership of René Brulhart, who was brought in as a layperson to lead that effort and to put in place structures that would match the best in the international markets. Why was that important? It was the fundamental piece that led in the end to the bank not having to shut its doors because it was able to access funding because it had a recognized regulatory framework. René Brulhart, by the way, was a crisis regulator very well known across Europe because he was also brought in to Liechtenstein when the doors to the agencies and financial services institutions in Liechtenstein were being closed. On the bottom of this page, you see some boring data, but I want to make it not so boring for just a minute because it's extraordinary that we even have this type of a report. So money laundering, anti-money laundering requires that you have controls in place and that you're able to detect the potential for suspicious activity. If you look at 2012, the number of suspicious transaction reports filed was 6. And then you can see what happened as the whole system was built out and computer programs with scenarios were put in place. The reporting numbers increased to 2015 to 537. Now that's not an indication that there's a huge amount of increasing bad activity. It's rather an indication that they have the ability to look at variances that need to be observed and make sure that they're okay. So this is a fundamental to being recognized as an institution that operates with internationally accepted practices. And you see on the bottom the numbers about the cash. And Danny was very articulate in saying, you know, do we have to tell everybody about the cash that we're operating in? So it's required to have reports in place, currency transaction reports for cash that's going in and cash that's going out, so that you ensure that your economy is not being used for nefarious purposes. It's not a tax avoidance location. It's not a money laundering haven. So these checks, to have these reports put in place, people know now that there's cash that's being used, and you have to indicate what it's being used for. So this is just a quick snapshot of the incredible work that has been done by Cardinal Pell and Danny Casey and many others, and with the Holy Father ultimately adopting a significant new legal regime inside the Holy See. So beginning in 2013, new laws on anti-money laundering adopted, moving toward the requirements for public balance sheets and accounting standards, ultimately resulting in treaties being signed for tax purposes with important neighbors, such as in Italy, which mean that they are increasing as a matter of law the transparency that's required within the government and within the banking institutions. So the reforms in the end, I thought it was a useful exercise to look at the new headlines as some of this work began to take root and grow. And I've organized some of these headlines into what I think are the key pillars of the reforms. Transparency, shining a light on the Vatican Bank and its financing. Governance, risk best practices. And you see headlines about the Vatican closing the book on the financial practices from the Middle Ages. Regulatory compliance with the Holy Father himself on the front page of the newspapers. Vatican Bank agrees landmark tax treaty with Italian regulators. Quality. And here there was a look toward accessing the very important resource that the church has, which is also its lay people that are expert in some of these areas, and looking across the clergy to find people that are really trained in these areas and that can contribute. So naming Cardinal Pell, bringing him from Sydney, and on the good work that was done there with the business management skills, bringing him in to run at the whole new structure to provide much more transparency. And sustainability. And here, that's, ensuring that the way the reforms are ultimately adopted, that the days of ripping off the Vatican are over. And Danny, if you didn't get one message from Danny, it's that. They're going to negotiate hard, they're going to negotiate clearly, and they're going to do that because they understand they are here to serve the poor. So for just a moment, these are those 5 areas, and I think it's worthwhile, even in your lives and in your practices, in your parishes, in your dioceses, in your religious organizations, to think about what do these 5 tools really mean. So transparency means in your own organizations, conducting comprehensive reviews, reporting to relevant stakeholders, at the parish level, giving information about the financial picture in a very comprehensive way. Governance and risk best practices, having checks and balances in place so that if mistakes are made, we don't have to think that there's bad behavior necessarily, but even just mistakes are being made, that they can be caught and corrected so that the appropriate reporting can take place up to boards that are qualified and understand the issues. Regulatory compliance, most boring words on the planet. But today, strategic. It's, what you see is that the regulators around the world have realized that whether you're a charitable organization or a worldwide international bank, you have to have regulatory compliance in place in order to be able to operate. And why is that? If we just think about the financial crisis and we move away from the church, what we understand is that there's a crisis of confidence even in the financial services sector broadly. So there has been a plethora of regulations that have been adopted aimed at making the processes inside the banks much stronger to create more confidence in them. And quality, bringing in people who are qualified, have accounting backgrounds, have communications backgrounds, understand with expertise, been trained for 20, 30, 40 years to do a job that's needed by the church. And sustainability, because at the end, success is not going to be achieved if there is not a sustainability component there. It'll just be a couple of years of history, and it won't be there for our children and for the poor. So here, amazingly, this is the first balance sheet that was published and provided to the public and the regulators, first ever in July of 2014. That's a landmark. So it means that these reforms are real. And part of, I'll say this here, what I want to do today is just bear witness to things that I know have been done and are being done on a regular basis that we can have confidence in. And these agreements moving forward, that's actually a picture, by the way, of the teller area in the Vatican Bank. And so reforms also at the central bank known as APSA, and COSEA doing a whole governance review so that those structures are being put in place. And this is His Eminence, Cardinal Pell, and you can hear how Danny Casey is channeling Cardinal Pell on a regular basis. It's morally wrong that a leader of the church disregard the accounts because they say they do not understand the money. We have to understand the money because that's how we'll create confidence in the populations that we need to serve. And I won't spend much time on this component here, but this is part of the work that we did, was to do an AML and anti-fraud review down to the very meticulous, very detailed, in the weeds, looking at every single account. And my people, we had 35 people there, sitting, looking through every single account. They gained access to every single one and were able to put the right standards in place that are expected internationally. And this is just a snapshot then of the various laws that are in place for regulatory compliance. The motu proprios, Law 18, these are significant milestones in the international world. And here's that point about quality. It's people at the end. Are the people qualified? And these are just some of the reformers. And Danny, you're right there, right below Cardinal Pell, with a significant background. That means that we can have faith and trust in what you're doing and know that the Vatican is on the course to have a very tight ship, and that's what we need in order to be here, around, relevant, and able to serve the poor for a much longer period of time. Joe Zara was the head of the COSEA Commission. He was brought in as a financial expert to run that commission. It was populated with people from all around the world, investment managers, former central bankers from Singapore, et cetera, to look at and study the issues and correct them. Jean-Baptiste de François is an asset manager by training. For many years, headed the European operations of a major asset manager, currently running the bank. René Brulhart, the president of the regulator. Ernst von Freiberg, the first president of the EOR, under whose leadership many of the accounts were cleaned up. And we were the servants, the outside advisors, to COSEA in the first place to help them put their reports together. But then secondly, to do the real roll-up, the sleeves work, and put those 30 people on the ground to make the cleanup. The last point here is point 7, and this is the bear witness component. Part of our engagement was to make sure that once we did the work, and we're not a lobbying firm or an advocate, but once we did the work to bear witness to its accuracy, to its meeting the international standards, and to be able to tell key stakeholders that are in the lay world, like other banks and regulators, that this is a clean shop. So these building blocks, transparency, best practices, compliance, quality, are all designed to achieve sustainability, and they have to be continually renewed. The best practices with the 4 I's principles and compliance as a strategic matter to be able to continue and to continue to respond to the changing environment. And this is just something that I thought I would share with you. It's a painting that is hanging in the office of the president of the EOR. And it was, it's just an interesting thing for you to know. It wasn't a normal assignment. There was a lot of certainly resistance, for example. So when we showed up with our international team to start to go through the accounts, well, there was nowhere to sit. And there were no computers available, or the electricity couldn't handle the computers. And finally, the president of the EOR said, well, I had a very large office with this beautiful painting in it. He said, I can take this closet office down the road, down the hall, and that whole team of 30 people set up in his office. And we worked under this painting. And the render unto Caesar is something that was always a reminder to us as we were doing our work that there's a higher authority and that we're doing the work for the longer term. And I just wanted to share that with you. The next couple of pages are probably take-home things that in your organizations, how can you look at making improvements and reforms like the Holy Father did? And I've put together 4 of them on the risk management side with how you can achieve some of the same changes with some specifics of what you can do. And also on the governance side with, focus on the roles and responsibilities and the oversight. So the bottom line is that the Vatican reforms really have set a precedent. And this is, precedence that's being put together at a moment when there's a tsunami of regulatory change taking place. And all around the world, financial services firms and charitable organizations are being asked to do their work at a much higher standard with much more process and control put in place. And the Vatican's no different. The Holy Father saw this, that the mundane world of regulatory compliance and achieving international practices from transparency point of view and financial accounting methods would mean that you would be able to operate, that it was a strategic moment, strategic move to put these things in place. And so there's just a summary here below, but what I want to do is just turn the page for a moment and just remind that it's almost, to me, a mathematical equation. Enhancing credibility and achieving long-term success or the new normal means putting these building blocks together, the transparency, the governance, the regulatory compliance, plus the quality. It equals credibility at the end of the day. And as boring as those things may be when put against some of the Gospels, they allow the Gospels to be fulfilled and for all of us to do the work that the Gospels ask us to do. And in the end, and this is sort of the challenge for all of us, is to take that credibility that's now being achieved and add to it sustainability. And that's what's so amazing about hearing Danny speak today. I mean, you can see that there's ongoing efforts in the Vatican, and that these will equal the long-term success, which means the Vatican will have the confidence that it needs to spread the good word. So thank you.
Great job, both of you. Thank you so much. I mean, our new watchwords here are service, excellence, and church management, and I think we saw the personification of those three things in these two people. We're going to turn it over to you to ask your questions. This is a unique opportunity to talk to the people who have really been at the heart of the transformation in the church. I ask you that when you ask a question, if you could identify who you are and who you represent. We'd like to do that. And I have a couple of questions, but I'm going to hold that until a little bit later. Your Excellency.
Hello, is this on? Yes. Hello, my name is Bishop Thomas Dowd. I'm the Auxiliary Bishop of the Archdiocese of Montreal. As a bishop who has some responsibility for temporal administration in the church and who has to try and frankly convince some of the priests to be more involved in the temporal administration in a competent way, there are two messages that we get that sometimes seem contradictory. One message is like what Cardinal Pell had said that you quoted, that we have to know something about the money, despite the fact we get really no training in it whatsoever. And the other message is, since you have no training in it, you should make sure there's lots of room for the laity who have lots of expertise so that they can come in and add their contribution, which I agree with 100%. But for myself and for a lot of my brothers, now a bit of personal background, I have a degree in international business and finance, so the money doesn't frighten me one bit. I see the importance. But in order to get these kind of positive changes through, and in order to make it happen, what is the proper role of clerical leadership in partnership with the laity? Could these reforms have happened at the Vatican without a cardinal pushing them through? With all of the experts in the world, could it have happened without, forget about the individual Cardinal Pell, could it have happened without that kind of senior clerical leadership? Where is the place of that clerical leadership in trying to bring these kinds of things forward? Thank you.
Danny, you want to take that one?
Yes, look, Your Excellency, thank you. I mean, it's a very, very good question, and I suppose I come from the school that says that I think it's very important that the church is clergy-led. And good leaders attract around them and build teams and build skills to address their own strengths and their own weaknesses. And so but what's got to happen in relation to this, I think, is there's got to be leadership and ownership of the obligations that come with with the stewardship entrusted to the clergy to be a parish priest. And there's got to be an engagement of lay advisors and lay staff that respect that leadership, but also then deliver and interact and engage as good teams and good management structures do. I had very similar issues with, I was having been the first layperson in Sydney in the role, I was deeply suspected by many of the clergy. And one in particular brought to me a proposal for an act of extraordinary administration when I'd only been there a few days. And the method and the approach was that it had to come through me to get to the Archbishop, the Cardinal, for approval. And he wanted my view on what it was. This was a long-term lease that the priest wanted to have renewed. Well, in fact, it was a 10-year lease. They were 3 years into the lease, and the tenant had wanted to hand the lease back in return for a 10+10. And he kindly offered, the parish priest told me, a 10% increase in rental. Now, that all sounded fantastic to the priest. And this guy was a good parishioner, and he's running a business on parish property, and he's et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And he wanted to increase his rent from $45,000 a year to $49,500, and the priest was beside himself. He wanted to get this signed up and get the extra money as quickly as possible. It just didn't smell right to me, handing back a 10-year lease 3 years in and offering kindly to give an extra 10%. It smelt to me like this was a below-market transaction. I had nothing to go on other than instinct and the fact that where I'd come from, it just didn't sound or smell right. Now, the priest went absolutely ballistic when I said I wasn't prepared to recommend it without thinking about and exploring the market values. He went out of his tree. And so anyway, 6 weeks later, we settled a new lease, a 10+10, and the starting rent was $137,500, not the $49,500 that was offered, $137,500 per year, with annual increments and market reviews every 5 years. So the good parishioner got his 10+10, but he had to pay something that more reflected the market values of the transaction. Now, I suspected that what he was doing, and indeed what he was doing, was locking that into his business, as he's perfectly entitled to do. I hold nothing he was negotiating with, who he was negotiating with. I've got no issues with him trying to do what he did. Now, the parish priest reluctantly accepted that I might have added some value in that transaction. So he conceded through gritted teeth that perhaps he overreacted. And I said the really sad thing with this is that $270,000 is in the parishioner's pocket and not doing good work in the parish, because this should have been done on day one. It should never have happened this way. Now, from that experience, what then happened is, I didn't set him aside. He's the parish priest. He'd never been counselled in this. He'd never been coached in this. I did then encourage there to be a framework around priests that would actually support them. We set some guidelines for finance committees. We helped, if the finance committees didn't have the skills, then I or my staff went out to help the parishes, to help grow those skills, to try and locate the people to guide the priest, respecting the clergy leadership, but also bringing their expertise and working in partnership. So that's one example we did. It's not an easy ride. I come at this from the point of view of it being clergy-led. To answer your very specific question, could the reforms have happened here without the leadership of the Cardinal? I would think absolutely not. They needed the leadership of the Cardinal. But I also think they wouldn't have happened without the leadership of Cardinal Pell in particular. He is something very, very special. I've met and dealt with many, many cardinals and archbishops from around the world. And I've also met with some enormously talented CEOs. But I haven't met too many that hold a candle to Cardinal Pell, particularly in this field. So, it was an inspired choice by the Holy Father. Thank you.
Danny and Kathleen, thank you so much. I'm Betty Ann Donnelly from the Mary J. Donnelly Foundation, which is based in Pittsburgh and a member of FATIGA. We are so grateful for everything that you have done the last few years. It's just extraordinary. And I've had the privilege to get this kind of report in this setting. But I'm thinking about especially U.S. Catholics in the pews. And once a year, they're asked to contribute to Peter's Pence. And so I'm wondering if we could are you working with the new communications apostolate to distill this good news in a clear fashion for people in the pews? Where does their money, when they give to Peter's Pence, go to? So to increase this sense of transparency, so someone could go to the Vatican website and says, this is the amazing reforms that have been engaged in. This is to help you know that when you give to Peter's Pence, this is where the money's going, and the transparency of showing the budget to people in the pews in the United States and other countries. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Betty. Thank you for that. Look, I make the comment about, I think I made the observation during the presentation, the hardest thing about learning the rules of a new game is forgetting the rules of the old. We actually requested and received the first ever Peter's Pence report internally for 2014. And in fact, what we received was a statement of income, not a statement of expenditure. But that was the first time we'd actually been given a statement at all. So that was a good start. I mean, look, and certainly in terms of the space in the world I come from, you know, if we are soliciting donations for a particular purpose, we owe it to the people who generously give that money to explain what happened to that money and to point to precisely where it went. Now, those views have been strongly and firmly put in various forums, and I anticipate that in time these things will occur. We cannot raise funds for one purpose and use them for something else, whatever might be in the fine print. So the views being expressed by Cardinal Pell and I and others in the Secretariat and the Council are very clear that we need to progress with transparency around Peter's Pence, around indeed all the collections that occur. There needs to be the rigours, there needs to be the precision, and there's nothing wrong. In fact, it's a series of what our experience is that if you actually do that, you tend to get more. I mean, if you demonstrate a connect between the giver's motivation and the cause that is served, it tends to work better all round. So that's where we are, but it's an unfinished piece of work. I can't give any more than that at this point.
Other questions you have? If you don't, I've got a question. Do you feel like it's part of, do you feel the Cardinal feels, and do you feel the Pope feels that it's part of the mission of the new prefect of the economy to disseminate throughout the church, around the world? And I'd also ask you to comment on whether or not you are seeing similar organizations to ours trying to effect the quality, best practices of temporal affairs in other parts of the world. Because following up on the bishop's comment, you found how hard it was initially being the leader in Australia. You've seen how hard it is at the Vatican. We've seen how hard it is in the United States. We're starting to hear other countries sort of be interested in it. But if we had the bully pulpit or the prophetic pulpit, however you want to call it, of the Vatican, of the Cardinal, to call lay leaders from around the world to provide the service and the professionalism and the capability that you have, we may be able to move the ship a lot faster. And I just wish you would sort of comment. I've said a couple of things in there, but maybe both you and Elizabeth, if you could comment on what you're seeing, hearing, what you think is needed, and how you feel. We know we have some ideas how you could help us, but do you sense that there's a vision there to have organizations like us do what you're doing?
You want me to go first? I'm happy to respond, and I'd be pleased for Elizabeth to also share her comments. We're very focused on our competence and authority and role within the walls, but we're also very focused on the fact that we have a moral leadership position. We can't, as I have described to many a Monsignor inside the walls here, that you might think we're some isolated community of 4,000 or 5,000 staff and comprising 200 or 300 or 500 residents. We're actually part of a global organisation, and there's 1.2 billion people out there who are relying and hoping and trusting and praying for the fact that we will do the right thing, we will do the very, very best that can be done. But, on top of that, if the church is strong, if we do this well, the world will be a better place to be. So in fact, there's a lot riding on this. And when my wife and I were praying and contemplating whether to make the move to Rome, one of the things that was very telling, one of my close friends said, but you've got a shot at helping strengthen the church. And if you strengthen the church, you'll strengthen the world. You've got to go for it. And I remember that as being one of the most persuasive inspirations that was given in a deep and dark moment when I really wasn't sure whether to do it or not. Now, we're also very conscious that our house is not clean and in order. No way, not yet. We've made enormous progress, but we've got a long way to go. So when we produced our financial management policies, all distilled based on IPSAS, it looks beautiful and we're very, very proud of it. But it was produced as a document to help deploy and help deliver change management at a local level. Now, immediately a number of cardinals and bishops said, can I take it home? Can I use it at home? Of course you can. But at this stage, until we've really started to get a few more runs on the board, we don't feel that we are competent to be able to be preaching to people on the other side of the world about what they should be doing. But the journey would be quicker. The journey would be faster if we're able to share this. We are merely trustees and stewards and servants working here at the present time, and we're not doing it alone. We need your prayers and we need your practical support. We need guidance. We need help on particular issues. We're always looking for people to serve on advisory boards or to help us with particular projects, or people we can just bounce ideas off that we know are loyal to the church, and then we can trust them. We know we're not going to read about them in the Wall Street Journal the next day. We can actually talk about to people things we might be worried about. So all those things are very important, but the work of your organisation and many others like that are so critical. And having come from the background, I never anticipated we would have had the impact in Sydney that we did. I didn't expect we would be able to unlock what we unlocked. It didn't look that bad when we first started. But that example I gave for that parish was that was the first of many. And where we just unlocked value that was there by probing, by pushing, by being a bit tough and being a bit difficult. And I think more and more that we can do that. Imagine what capacity, imagine what potential we can unlock to do good in the world.
And there's just to say this, there's a very strong sense in Rome that what is being done not for Rome, not for Vatican City, but for 1.2 billion Catholics around the world. I was asked that question, are you ready to do this work on behalf of 1.2 billion Catholics around the world? This work is so, so important. So I would suggest that the Cardinal, and Danny, you as well, that you're almost too humble, because I don't think you need a perfect house to be able to go out and to, for those 1.2 billion Catholics, explain the great work that you've been doing, the very particular detailed processes that are being put in place, the way to negotiate a real estate lease so that it's done very well and the highest amount of market value is being brought to all of the coffers of the church for the poor. And so I don't think it needs to be a finished project to go out there if there's time. And I recognize time because you're still in the building mode, that time is very scarce. But to me, it'd be so important to have the Rome really advocate that an organization such as this one could be replicated and could work with you to help deliver the messages to the diocese and religious organizations and parishes about how to do this, and also that it's being done, because that will make it also sustainable. It won't be something that could disappear. And there's so much good that's being done. I would so strongly encourage to build a way to get those messages out, because they're good.
Thank you.
Thank you. Marcos Ramirez, representing the CSG Educational Network, which is a network of elementary Catholic schools with the Sisters of St. Joseph Orange. You know, appreciate the contrast between the financial lens and the pastoral lens, and how the balance and blend of both is really what's going to help us create a journey of transparency, accountability, and participation. In that, I think my question is, how much formation or clarification is there of the leadership in charge of the stewardship of the balance of both necessary in order to succeed in this journey? Just a quick example. When we talk about sustainability and success, and we apply that within the sustainability of elementary Catholic schools in California, for example, the interpretation of sustainability and success from a financial perspective may lead a diocese to consider merging and eliminating a number of the poorest urban schools that are not financially sustainable in the long term. However, the pastoral perspective says we must sustain those schools even if we have to subsidize them, because it is the morally right thing to do from a pastoral perspective. So in the lens of balancing both the pastoral and the financial lens, to make good decisions for the good of all, how would that play out as we assume some of the practices based unguided by the standards?
Do you go first, Elizabeth, or would you like me to do? What would you like to?
I'll start, Danny, and then maybe you can jump in. I don't think that there's a prescription about strong financial practices that would in any way, shape, or form command the closing of schools that serve poor, needy children. So the two are not by any stretch of the imagination exclusive. It's rather the other level that I'd like to just ask you to think about, and that is, are you doing the best with the dollars that you have in order to be able to ensure that they can reach as far as they can? And so strong practices that attract more donations because there's trust and confidence in them will allow you to serve more underserved children. And so they go hand in glove from my point of view, the strong practices. It doesn't mean you have to make a for-profit decision with every investment that you make. It means that you have to do the very best with the dollars that you have and not squander them, put the processes in place.
And look, absolutely agree. I spoke about the need to make a clear distinction between the pastoral mission related work and the and activities that are commercial. Running a school particularly for the poor, but any sort of school would we do that for pastoral work. We do that to save souls. We do that to evangelise and catechise. And I would not be putting financial benchmarks around that, but I would be requiring a level of sound management and administration to make sure that the monies that are gifted and in the program are being well spent, well managed, and there's tight controls. My great delight out of what we've done here, and certainly what we did in Sydney, was the opportunity to enter into the business discussions and to actually squeeze money out that could then be such that we could have more and more schools. And one of the great projects, I received an update. I was back in Sydney a few weeks ago, and not long before Cardinal Pell and I left, we helped establish a school for street-based Aboriginals, Indigenous people. We're a very fortunate community in Australia, but we've got certainly some disadvantage in certain Indigenous communities. And one of the things about this is that just attracting a special school model that would encourage people to who are living on the street to actually start entering into education. Education with a pathway out of poverty for them. And in fact, yeah, the school is full. There's only small numbers, but it's full. The ambition, the targets that were set are full. And yeah, we could not have put our financial resources into a wonderful measure like that if we'd not had some very tough conversations with some business people on long-term leases and other things that had nothing to do with the mission work. So you know, that distinction, exactly as Elizabeth put it, is so fundamental. But I wouldn't blend the two. I wouldn't blend the two at all.
Again, can I just ask before we go to the next question, are there any practical pieces of advice that you could give the group in terms of the working relationship that you developed with Cardinal Pell, whether in Sydney or more recently, in your evolution of your working relationship that you think were absolutely critical to the successes that you've had, and how he educated you or you educated him, or you know, what were some of the more practical, tougher kinds of things that you had to iron out?
He said, I did ask Cardinal Pell why he wouldn't take a priest for the role and then have someone, you know, more junior with him. And he said, if I had a priest with a CV exactly the same as yours, I'd take the priest. But I couldn't see how a priest could have your CV and be a faithful priest. So it's the CV I'm after. So he then said to me, look, yeah, I suppose there's a number of different things we need to get right if we're going to work well together. And one is that I'm actually the Archbishop and I have the final say. But what I will do is I will not be straying into your area of competence, certainly without having a dialogue and discussion. And I want your commitment to make sure you will always tell me what you think, even if you know it will upset me. I need you to tell me what you think. Now, you know, I would think probably 99 times out of 100 when I said what I thought, the Cardinal consented, agreed, conceded, didn't proceed. Maybe 1 in 100, he said, well, I hear you and thank you for saying that, but I'm still going to do something else. That happens. He's the boss. That's the way it works. So I would think, if advice within that is to make sure that we're very clear. I never wanted to be the Archbishop of Sydney. I don't want to be the Prefect of the Secretariat for the Economy. But it's my great privilege to have served you know, the man who served in both of those roles as the director of his office here. Yes, giving advice, implementing things. Yeah, I mean, he does not challenge or question the way in which I'm analysing the cash flows or the policies we're writing to make sure they're consistent with IPSAS. He's relying on me to do that. But in fact, you know, and I respect and want and believe in clergy leadership. But I also think the leadership, good leadership, requires to have people around who address your own lack of competence or experience. And good leadership encourages a dialogue where your staff can tell you what they think. So if there's one thing that matters, it's actually if you can see something that you think your boss can't see, then as respectfully as you can, you tell them that's what it is, but you also respect their right to make the decision. So the arrangements that we have with the Cardinal were very clear. If it was his decision, I had to leave him to make it. I'd give advice. If it was mine, in my area, he's very happy for me to make it. And so that was the way in which we've worked and worked well for all those years.
Great, thanks. Mike?
Hello, I'm Mike Montalongo, a new board member with the Leadership Roundtable, and I just want to, first of all, add my thanks, along with others, to both of you and your peers for the great work that you've done. And I want to go back to a discussion thread that I think, Jeff, you had begun, and want to be very clear about the challenge I think is before us now that you've completed much of this work and you've had this success, and that is the cascading challenge of essentially spreading this on a wider basis and having very explicit knowledge transfer, knowledge management strategies so that we can leverage the great work that you've done, and so that this doesn't get, or that those that feel that these are good things to do don't have to reinvent wheels that you've already invented. So you may have already touched this. I just wasn't clear that there is now, at least in the inbox, or maybe even maybe it has been addressed, but making very crystal clear that indeed now that these successes have been made, that one of the certainly next steps is addressing the cascading challenge, and as I said, putting in place some very explicit knowledge transfer, knowledge management strategies. Thanks.
Sure. Thank you. Sorry.
Go ahead, Danny, if you have a comment.
Yeah, look, just very quickly, I mean, that's absolutely true. We've got to cascade. This forum and the fact that we're able to engage like this is part of that process. I mean, some practical things at this end. You would have heard that Cardinal Pell has changed the curriculum, at least, and now participates in Baby Bishop School. To actually introduce some of the concepts and material is starting, and dialogue is starting. Potentially there's dialogue about ad limina visits and the quality of reports and the standards that come. I mean, they present an enormous opportunity to set a frame for how people might report, and so on. I think that another area that's being explored is the idea and requirement that upon retirement of one bishop to another, there needs to be an independent audit and review of the books, a bit like the change of government. And so, I mean, all these things are potential ways of keeping the momentum going on some of the learnings. Certainly, everything here is available if people wish, and while we've been busy doing other things, it's a great delight to have a chance to share and exchange some of that. And if any of that is useful, we're very happy to do it. But your organisation and your attendance here has enormous implications because now we're together. We actually can share, and all that material that we've got is available for you for sure.
I agree with the point being made that there should be something very explicit about how to cascade the learnings. And I'm just reminded, about a year ago, I gave a talk to an international conference of diocese fund finance managers, business managers. And amazingly, at the end of that talk, one of a U.S. finance manager from a diocese came up to me and said, "So do you have to give the financials to the parishes? Do you have to give them to the parishioners?" And I said, absolutely yes. That's, the number one pillar that we're talking about is transparency, to create the credibility and confidence in the church. It should be shared. And he said that his archbishop was completely opposed to doing that. So that was just real evidence that there's a need out there still, I think, to give direction and maybe some basic processes or principles that cascade out would be so useful, I think.
Just on a practical note, do you think it would be helpful if, say, the leadership roundtable here and some of the budding leadership roundtables of other countries and other bishops' conferences, if we communicated together and maybe either made a visit to you all or made a visit to one of the groups that you had mentioned that are governing bodies, to let them know, of what we're doing, but also of the desire to build off of what you have built there. Is that a helpful thing, a worthwhile thing to do?
Absolutely. I think that would be outstanding. I think that would be very, very good. I mean, it'd be a useful connect. I mean, one of the other things I didn't mention in this dialogue here, and this is another reason for doing exactly what you're suggesting there, Jeff. We've started a small internship program with the Catholic University of America and the Australian Catholic University. The Cardinals always have wonderful ambitions, and what he said is his idea for this is to evolve it to the equivalent of the White House internships. with this stream of opportunities of people coming from around the world to serve inside the walls and providing people inside the walls the opportunity to go elsewhere to learn. Now, that sort of engagement, how do you turn something so small as our initial internship program into the White House internship program? We do it through engaging with people like yourself and others from around the world, and we start to work together. How can we do that? Are there people in your world, in your space, who would put their hand up to come here for 3 months, 6 months, 12 months, to do some work? And would you be open to receiving people from here who might want to have some international experience? We've got to do something about internationalising our operation, because we don't just live inside those walls. We're an international show, and we're the only operation guaranteed to be here to the end of time. We have to manage ourselves well.
Are there any other questions? Listen, thank you both very much. This has been incredible. We really appreciate it.